Welcome, everybody. This is the Just Keep Reaching show, where we are helping you fulfill your full potential in life and in business by sharing stories, tips, and experiences from those who just keep reaching. My name is Joe Rosner, and each week I will bring you incredible guests in order to show you that we all come from different places, but to fulfill our full potential, we must just keep reaching. Welcome back, everybody, to another amazing episode of the Just Keep Reaching show with an incredible guest today. Top female keynote speaker, originally from Bismarck, North Dakota. She's a serial entrepreneur. She's the founder of Back on My Feet nonprofit organization and the founder of Solidcore, Anne Mahlum. Now, we're going to jump right into this. Welcome, Anne. You know, I got a whole bunch of questions. I know your time is extremely important, so let's go ahead and dive right into this.
Yes.
When you started Back on My Feet, was that something that you kind of went into, you had a vision for that, or was that just something that you kind of planned out, or did it kind of why did that occur for you?
Yeah, definitely. It wasn't planned at all. It just sort of happened. I was 24 or between the ages of 24 and 26 and just feeling pretty lost. And running was really the only thing that I felt defined me. I did it all the time. I ran every morning. And I was sort of trying to figure out what my calling was, what my purpose was. My life just kind of felt empty and non-purposeful, and I was yearning for that. And on one of my morning runs, I started to pay attention to the guys outside this homeless shelter that I constantly ran by, and I had ran by it literally hundreds of times before, and just didn't take notice. I'm not sure why, but once I did, I started to develop a pretty fun rapport with the guys living outside the shelter, and realized that I was robbing them. I should be running with them. Why don't I share this with them? And had this idea to start a running club and convince the director of the shelter to let me do it. And over the next few weeks, really understood that this was never meant to be a running club, that it was just the vehicle that was there to help people learn to love themselves a little bit more and understand their capabilities, and that we could use running to help change people's identity. So this vision started to form at this point about change and emotional change, and that if we can get people to see themselves as a runner, a teammate, an athlete, disciplined, focused, and someone who's not homeless, then maybe we can help them get a job and move forward and have more independence in their life. And so no one else really thought it was a good idea. At least they thought it was admirable and venerable. And, this is very sweet of you to think like this, Anne, but let's be real. And I had to go against the grain of sort of all my adult figures in my life, and just decided that I'm going to try this. I've been working in nonprofits for a few years. I have the passion for this. I feel very, very adamant that I'm supposed to help these people. So it just made a lot of sense in my brain. And I started to put structure in place and raise money and build programming and surround myself with really smart people. And we built a fully fledged, really respectable, privately funded nonprofit that helps thousands of people all over the country now.
That is absolutely incredible. So went into this, it was for you were running for yourself to find purpose in yourself. And by doing so, you realize that you can give other people purpose at the same time.
I mean, definitely. But, I realized from a pretty early age that running doesn't discriminate. It doesn't matter what color your skin is. It doesn't matter how much money you make. And it made me feel very strong and sure of myself. And I thought I could do the same thing for these guys.
Now that's amazing. So let me ask you this. So you speak all over the place, being a top keynote speaker. I know you spoke with TEDx. You talk a lot about leadership, being bold, finding your happiness in social change. Can you kind of go into that? What made you decide that you wanted to start speaking? Is it something that you felt a passion for, or was it something that just naturally started happening as you're moving forward and helping people?
Yeah, as Back on My Feet was growing and a lot of our partners were corporate, the story of Back on My Feet, about my dad's an addict. I started running when I was 16 to deal with those issues with my dad, with my family life. And then to have all of that come full circle and use running to help people remind me of my father. There was just this really emotional origin to this organization. And I found that if I could get in front of people and tell this story, I could get them very excited about what Back on My Feet was and what we were doing and get them involved. And also humanize this issue of homelessness and help people see that it's different than what they think it is. Most people don't think of anybody who's homeless as also being a runner. So this oxymoron really worked in the organization's favor to get people to, again, approach homelessness or look at those who are experiencing homelessness differently. So I found myself, in front of huge audiences, AT&T, Accenture, and sort of seeing that, like, one, this is a really effective medium for me to reach people. And two, I really enjoy it. And three, I was getting really good at it by just being vulnerable on stage and talking about my journey. I found that other people were just opening up to me and each other if I sort of took the first step and opened up. So yeah, and now I have an agent and, get the opportunity and I'm fortunate enough to go speak once or twice a month in different places, talking about entrepreneurship, taking control over your life, thinking about what you want for your life, not making excuses, all the way from that to talking about fundraising or, the business behind running a business and starting a business and, my take on it and how I've been able to be successful with 2 ventures and also sharing the mistakes I've made along the way.
Wow. It's not only incredible, but it's amazing to see how much impact one person can have and create such a change and such a movement and such a community. Because when you got up on stage, I'm sure, especially the first couple of times, it wasn't easy for you. It was probably a little nerve-wracking and right. You're probably trying to figure out what to say. How did that feeling change you moving forward? Like feeling like you had to go first?
Yeah, I think, I can remember even starting Back on My Feet and thinking the same thing of like, I remember looking around in Philadelphia and looking at these businesses and buildings and thinking of people that I admired. And I'm like, you know what? Change only happens with one person. One person has to say or do something. And yes, a movement can happen after that, but there's no other way. And if it can be that person and that person built this and that building wasn't there 10 years ago, and I'm so excited about this and I'm passionate about it and I feel like I'm smart enough to figure it out, it doesn't have to be somebody else. It can be me. So yeah, on stage, yeah. When I first started speaking, it was definitely nerve-wracking, but what gets me through those moments is also, if anybody else was on stage, they would also be nervous. We're all the same in that way. So I just sort of, I don't look at the audience and think that they're a paragon, right? Like I just sort of connect with them and know that nerves is part of it, and I think it's really important to do things that make you nervous. If you're not, then you're way too comfortable. You're not pushing yourself in your relationships and your careers or anything if every day is just sort of easy.
Yeah, no, that's a prime example of stepping outside of your comfort zone, the things that you have created and have been able to just kind of push through and make that impact. Now, you talk about being bold, and I hear this a lot from, a lot of people, especially in the entrepreneur space. I work with a lot of, smaller businesses and coaches and stuff. And I always hear the term being bold. What does that mean to you? What would you say to some of the listeners when they hear that term, like, hey, you need to be bold? What would that mean?
I think it means a couple things. First thing, it means that you stand up for what you think is right and you don't get bullied by the masses and the voices. Because it's for a woman, it's like asking your friend if you should cut all your hair off. No one wants to tell you to cut your hair short because of like, what if you hate it and don't like it? So no one wants to push you and tell you to get a divorce or tell you to quit your job, because if it doesn't work out, then you're left with the lack of security that was in your life before, even though you might have not been happy. So people choose security over happiness. And so I really think you have to own your decisions and speak up for yourself and not do the things that can feel like you're swimming in the same direction as all the other fish and going against the grain a little bit, even if it's uncomfortable and you're the only voice there. That's happened a couple times. I've gotten a year and a half ago, I got bombasted for speaking out against Trump and Ivanka. And, it was 4 days of being thrown into the trolls and everything else. And people are like, Anne, you need to keep politics out of your business. And I'm like, I will not. I have a platform and I have a voice, and you may not agree with my voice, and that's okay, but I'm not going to placate myself or my opinion because you don't want me to piss anybody off. If I'm not upsetting somebody, I'm not making enough noise, and I'm not being true to my voice. So I've always felt that way. I don't need everybody to like me.
And I think that is so huge. And I think that resonates with so many people. And I think that alone, what you just said, can make such an impact just on this podcast alone, because I know so many people feel discomfort. I know so many people don't want to do something that could bring a little bit of maybe conflict or some people out to say something against them. So they take a step back, and that prevents them from moving forward. Wow. That is absolutely incredible. Now, you created the Back on My Feet and also Solidcore. When did Solidcore, Solidcore is massive. Like this, it's just incredible. How did that come to play within all of this?
Yeah. So, I did Back on My Feet for about 6.5 years, and about 6 years into it, I sort of began to feel like it was time to go do something else. And that was really difficult to accept because for so many years I thought I had found my purpose and calling, and I will do this the rest of my life. So to feel yourself evolving and growing beyond something that defined you for so long was very challenging, and I resisted, and I sort of tried to shut down the voices, and then realized that, this is not a bad thing. Me moving on from Back on My Feet means I'm growing, and means the organization is growing and evolving as well. The organization, frankly, needed a different leader at that point. Like I'm a serial entrepreneur. I like to create and build, and I like to go fast. And sometimes that's not the best formula for a company, a nonprofit or for-profit. And Back on My Feet needed to just kind of take care of what had been built. It grew to 12 cities in 4 years. It was a lot. So I knew I didn't want to just operationally focus on, going deeper or looking at the program. That wasn't my talent or where I was going to get the most energy. So, I've been a workout junkie my whole life. I decided, I was in LA for work, and I did this workout there. And it was something like I've never done before, slow and controlled resistance training. I'm sure, Joe, I can tell by looking at you, you do a lot of explosive movements, heavy lifting, I thought you had to do all of those things to work out. And turns out that there's a different way to go about it. And after I started doing this slow and controlled resistance training, my body completely changed. My metabolism, I felt like, skyrocketed. I was eating pretty normally, and I've had food struggles my entire life. And, I had shape and tone and definition in parts of my body as a 35-year-old that I couldn't, no matter how hard I worked out as a 25-year-old, couldn't seem to develop. So I became really excited about it. And my superpower is creating these experiential brands. So I knew if I could combine this workout, which felt like a magic pill, as long as you're willing to do the work, with this brand and community, that this could be a really sort of successful movement. And I felt just obligated to educate people that you don't have to starve yourself and beat up your body and do cardio for 3 hours a day. It's exhausting, literally and figuratively. So it just sort of started from there. So there's a lot of authenticity in anything that I choose to be a part of. I did Solidcore this morning. I do it 5 days a week. I believe in the workout. I drink the Kool-Aid, and we're trying to spread it as far and wide as we can. And as our tagline says, help as many people as possible create the strongest versions of themselves.
That's incredible. And you're absolutely right. And I feel like that so many people can't necessarily adapt to some of the change because it was so cookie cutter, and it was so, you need to have a strict, diet, you need to have, this, or you need to lift super heavy on a regular, like all of those things that they were afraid to change. And I think with Solidcore coming around, that gave people a new feeling, a new way to look at life as a whole. Like, you don't have to spend hours in the gym. You don't have to, you know what I mean, do all of this stuff. So I think it's incredible, not only that you created it, but how fast it's growing and how fast it's moving forward. I mean, how many locations do you have, and where, like, are they all over the United States now?
Yeah, we have a decent footprint. We've been in operation for 4.5 years, and we have 33 locations around the country. Yeah, the first one opened in DC in November 2013. Most of our locations are in the DC, Virginia, Maryland area, but we have studios in Chicago, Dallas, Austin, in Florida, Atlanta, North Dakota, ironically enough, which is where I'm from, as you mentioned, Michigan, Indianapolis, Philly. So, and we have 15 more locations opening in the next 4 months. So, and those are most of them are staying on the East Coast, so to speak. But you know, we're opening in Manhattan. We're looking to cluster in our current markets, which obviously is good for brand equity and brand awareness. And yeah, our plan is to open about 25 studios a year for the next probably 4 years or so. Wow.
That's incredible. That's 33 locations in 4.5 years and 20 some more locations. That's phenomenal. When you say serial entrepreneur and you like to go fast, you're not kidding.
Yeah, I know. And that's, as you talk about the entrepreneurship and your team, you know, it would be disastrous if there was 5 of me on my team. You know, I need some people here who are able to look at things differently, put the brakes on stuff, you know, challenge me to look at data differently. And it's really important as entrepreneurs build their teams out that they don't hire people like them. You need a nice balance of different ways of thinking, different approach, left brain versus right brain, and get people on your team who are not good, who are much better at the things that you're not.
That's, you know, speaking of that, you know, I have a question that goes into, you see a lot of entrepreneurs, like entrepreneurship is bigger now than I feel like it's ever been, and working with so many people, and you see them, they kind of get started and then they kind of fizzle out. Do you think that's because there's so much kind of fluff going around, like you can do things on your own, you know, from your computer type of thing, which can be true for a period of time, I think. But what is your take with doing that? Would you say build your team out as fast as you can with the growth of what you're doing with your business?
Yeah, it depends on what your business is and what you're trying to accomplish. And anytime someone comes to me and says that they, you know, want to start a business or something, I'm like, you know, you shouldn't be looking to start a business. You should be like, I'm so passionate about this. I have to start a business around it. There needs to be an idea before there's a business. You know, I had a mentor say to me that money doesn't lead, it follows. So if you're just looking to make money, you know, and build a business, it's never going to work because you don't have enough of a compelling reason behind why you're doing what you're doing when it gets really hard. That's why people quit. You know, that's why they leave marriages or businesses or anything else. There's not enough there to keep you, and the work takes precedent over the passion, and you don't follow through with it. So, you know, I think that always depends on what you're trying to do. I think before you start something, again, I always tell people too, like, I'm not a big fan of business partners. I think that there's too many opportunities to go awry. Especially when the thing, it's easy when it's an idea, when the thing starts to grow and it becomes something, and let's just say one person doesn't want to do it anymore, but that person has equity, you know, it's just really tricky. So when you're starting your business, I always advise, don't give away equity in the beginning. Don't take a business partner, you know, pay people along the way if you can. And also, you know, use loans, put credit cards, like have some skin in the game, because if you don't have skin in the game, again, it's like, if it's not your money and it's not your mortgage or your house or your, you know, something on the line, it's really easy to walk away.
I agree with what you're saying. And you said, you know, have some skin in the game, use credit cards, use that. I see so now, like, what do you think about saving, right? Like, not necessarily saving, but there's so much around, don't put money on a credit card, don't, you know, like all of this stuff. When you're an entrepreneur, is that an option for you? Or would you say you need to kind of go all in to move forward?
Yeah. So I think the first question is, You got to figure out if you're an entrepreneur or not. And if putting money on credit cards makes you nervous, you're probably more risk averse than you think that you are. And if you're too risk averse, being an entrepreneur is not going to be something you're going to be comfortable with. So that's the first thing. I mean, I spoke on a panel probably 4 months ago now, and a room full of all these women, super excited. And the first question, to me and to other women were about how everybody in the room can be an entrepreneur. And I was like, that's false advertising. And it's unfair. And frankly, a little insulting to those of us who are entrepreneurs to be like, anybody can do it. That's like saying anybody can be a nuclear physicist. Like, that's just not true. So, I talked about that a little bit of really figuring out if you're meant to be an entrepreneur or not. And I also want to point out that if you're not an entrepreneur, it doesn't mean you aren't valuable. Like my number 2 and 3 people on this team, like I couldn't run this company without them. They offer just as much input and opinion and value, as I do. And it's really important that their voices are heard. So that being said, if putting $5,000 in your own idea makes you nervous, but you want other people to put $5,000 into your idea, I think you need to think about that, because that's my rule of thumb. I will not invest in anybody's company until you show me that you are fully invested, whether it's your time or money or something, that if this thing doesn't go well, that you've got something to lose as well.
Absolutely. Wow. That's a good outlook on it. And I think it's incredible. And I'm right there. This is, wow. It's amazing when you connect with people and you see their passion through their words and what they've done and what they've created really come to life right in front of you. It's amazing. Let me ask you, so if I know this is kind of cliche, right? What's a piece of advice that you would give the listeners to move them, or maybe a message that you've given, previously on stage, to move somebody outside of their comfort zone towards their passion?
Yeah, so I think I believe in accountability and putting things out there. So if whether it's social media or something else, if you are planning to start something, writing out your project plan and being like, what do I need to do to get here? What needs to happen by November 1st? And put dates and actual days of the week down. Because if it just remains this, I'm working on it. We all have friends. I've got plenty of friends who've been working on something for 3.5 years. And I'm like, okay, do you want me to be your friend right now? Or do you want me to tell you from a business perspective, like you just don't give a shit. You don't care enough about it. You're looking for excuses. You like the idea of who you could be if you did this, but it's too scary for you to actually do it. And you might as well own that and say that and deal with that than for all of your friends around you to be like, continue to support this idea that's not going anywhere. And I think that's really important. So I think you need to, if you've had an idea for years that you haven't done something with, I think you need to have a hard conversation with yourself. And that doesn't even have to be entrepreneurship, Joe. I mean, people, I'm sure, who've been talking about losing weight for 5 years and haven't done it. Who've been talking about doing yoga or going to church or taking this trip or getting scuba certified, whatever it is, and they haven't done it. So my first piece of advice is figure out why that is and be honest with yourself so you can answer that question, and then you can probably figure out how to move forward. But brutal honesty is part of my approach, which again, sometimes isn't very much or very well received, but if you want me to be my friend, I can be nicer, maybe again, pitch things to you differently. But if you're looking for my business advice, then you have to be prepared for me to say some things that maybe aren't going to feel so great.
I agree 100%. And I enjoy the brutal honesty, because I think there's so many people now that they may not do it on purpose, but they don't speak up loud enough when they know somebody can be doing better, when they know that somebody can be pushed a little bit more forward in a direction that could potentially change, their life and or their business. Could you speak to an individual that has, maybe they've tried something and it didn't go forward, and then they tried something and it still didn't work, and then now they're thinking in their head, man, I think I'm just going to quit. I'm going to give up. I'm going to throw in the towel. What would you say to that individual?
Yeah, I mean, same thing. I don't think it has to be the same answer. It really depends on what the idea is. Sometimes it's okay to let an idea die. If it's like, this isn't working. I maybe was wrong about what I thought this could be, so it's time to move on and let go. If it's not the idea and the idea is good and it's just sort of making some bad decisions along the way, I think it's assessing those decisions and saying, why do I keep doing this? Am I sabotaging something here? Am I the wrong person to execute this idea? And you got to start to dissect it a little bit more to figure out where maybe the problems are coming from. But, listen, if it's things that are out of your control, for my business, construction issues happen. I mean, machine maintenance issues. There are things that can be like, but, Joe, the other piece of that is like, that's just part of it. So sometimes your expectations aren't in line with what actual reality is of starting your own business. Like there's going to be roadblocks. There's going to be things that you're like, I didn't think of that. And if that's enough for you to quit, then again, it's sort of reassessing and saying, maybe I'm not cut out for this. But there is no entrepreneur out there that started something and can sit there and tell you, oh yeah, I was aware of everything that was going to happen along the way. It's just not true. You got to take it in stride. I've been evicted from one of my locations. I've been sued twice. I've been, I've had some employees doing some bad stuff. Like it's all part of it. So if I'm not expecting, again, those roadblocks, it's going to feel a lot heavier than it is. But if you can be like, listen, this stuff is just going to happen along the way, then it doesn't have to feel so heavy.
I think that's amazing advice. And I think it's great because that speaks truth to so much the BS that's out there about entrepreneurship and being something that's incredibly easy. And I think that's setting some of these entrepreneurs up that may have a good shot at setting a lower expectation of what happens. And then when it does happen, it puts them into a false state. So let me ask you this. How has giving more led to more success for you? I'm huge on giving. I've donated with, Challenge Athletes Foundation, Operation Rebound, Mission Continues, those types of things. And that's when I truly found my purpose and how I've been the happiest in my life is when I'm serving others. What does that look like for you? How has that helped you move forward and created more success for you by giving to other people?
Yeah, I think, it's easy as an entrepreneur and a founder to sort of think it's all about you. And as a beginning stage founder, it's a mistake that most people make, right? Like in Back on My Feet, this organization was so tied to who I was as a person individually. And there was a part of me that loved that. But then I sort of realized, God, this thing is more about me than about this thing I'm trying to do and the people I'm trying to help. So no, for those people who sort of go through that's normal. But when you start to realize that, the decisions I make for this company, I ask and say, is this best for my team members? And is this best for my clients? And if the answer to any of that is no, or no, this is not going to benefit them or whatever, I think long and hard before I do it. If it's a business, if it's financials, if it's pricing, if it's something, I try to think about the entity as a team unit instead of putting myself first. And, I could get into a lot of politics with you about that, but it's, I lead my company the way that I sort of put my politics, which is, everybody in Soildcore has some sort of equity in this company if you're a full-time employee here. And that's because, I very much believe in the notion that it takes everybody holding up their end of the table to make this thing work. I just think it takes everybody on the team doing their part and that there's value. I don't care what your title is, or I don't care what your role is. If everybody's not doing their part, this ecosystem falls apart and doesn't work. So that's the way that I feel is really important for me to be a leader and a CEO, that everybody feels that they have ownership, again, figuratively and literally in this company. Favorite part of my job or anything that I do are the emails that I get from folks about how much their life has changed or this community, what this has done for them. So that piece is great. And then of course, now being able to be in a place where Solidcore can financially and myself being able to financially support organizations. We were the title sponsor for Back on My Feet's gala event here in DC. Out of all these huge companies, that sponsor them, here's Solidcore, this small business that, put up $25,000 to be the title sponsor because it's the right thing to do. And that's the kind of company that we are. It's not just about, how much profit is there. I fully believe in, you can also, you can do well by doing good at the same time. we as a company and myself personally, making financial contributions are important to us, part of our principles. And just going back to if any decision I make is going to harm or not be beneficial to my employees, my team members, or my clients, it's not the right decision. So I try to put them at the forefront of the decision making. And if they're best served, then that's the right decision.
That's incredible. Now, and you have a lot, I think I was reading something that you have a lot of employees and the retention is pretty high.
Yeah, we're really proud of that. We have, part-time folks who work for us that are coaches and then full-time employees, but we have very low attrition here. And I think that goes to many things of culture, community, buy-in, working for a fast-paced company, of something they're excited and passionate about, open communication, transparency, and having fun. All that stuff is balanced. We're a very understanding company, and I think we've got great benefits that we offer here, and just a very supportive environment that we treat you like adults. And we're not going to babysit you. We have unlimited vacation policy here, which means, I don't care if you're working from the beach or you're working from your apartment or you're working from the office. We're pretty clear in our expectations of what your KPIs are and what we expect your value to be for your role in this company. And if you're hitting those benchmarks, then great. Who am I to tell you, where you have to be sitting to do that?
I love that you mentioned the community aspect, and you have, those set expectations, and you mentioned KPI. And I feel like, especially in the online world with a lot of the entrepreneurs, coaches, whether it's, mindset or fitness or something like that, I think they're kind of, the one thing that I see more commonly lacking is KPI. How important would that be for your business?
Yeah, tracking KPIs is extremely important, because if people don't know what they're being measured against, one, it's really unfair for you to give reviews for them. Giving people direction and when they're going to be successful, that helps people feel really good about the work that they're doing, and feeling successful is just as important as being successful. So, key KPIs for people who may not know are key performance indicators. And again, setting those out so that, and also explaining why they are what they are. We start at the top and say, this is what we're looking at for the overall performance of the company. Now, how do we get there, and what's your role in it? And so that way you not only become vested in your own role, but you become vested in your teammates' role, and you want the best teammates on the team, because if they're not carrying their weight, it doesn't matter really what you're doing, because we're never going to get there. And I think that's a really important message for people to understand, and to really try to be supportive of your team, and that knowing that if everybody's doing well, that's a great thing for yourself and for the place where you work.
That's awesome. And that's a really good description of not only tracking and the importance, but a KPI in general, especially for the new entrepreneurs that maybe, they probably track some things, but don't realize the importance of it. Almost, you know what I mean? Like trying to lose weight, like that, those types of things, being in a caloric deficit versus not being in a caloric deficit, right? Obviously it's hard to lose weight if you're not in a caloric deficit. It's just probably not going to happen. But you can only do that by tracking those numbers and being on point. So let me ask you, where can people find you? What do you have something coming up? Do you do things that people can reach out to you and connect with you?
Yeah, social media is good. You can find me on social media, of course, and I'm pretty good about responding to emails if I can be helpful or if there's relevance there. I do coach at Solidcore if people wanted to come and experience a class. Some of the speaking stuff I do usually is not really open to the public, but, podcasts like this, Joe, I try to do one of these every month too, to try to have distribution out there. I'll do panels in DC and places around talking about business. So things like that. And, hopefully in the next year or two, there'll be a book or some more mediums that come out. It's kind of just gets a little challenging to do that with growing the company and trying to stay focused on that. But yeah, so if people have specific questions about things, I always encourage them to reach out. Again, social media is probably the best way to do it, over Instagram or Facebook. And I do respond to those messages.
And on social media, how do they find you? What is your name? I know there's a lot of different names out there, whether it's the Solidcore or is it your name in general?
Yeah, so Solidcore is one of them. And then mine's just my name of, Anne Mahlum. So that's easy on Instagram and Facebook.
One last thing. When you think about where you've been, and this might sound cliche as well, if you could do it all over again, what's one piece of advice you would give yourself?
To not be so hard on myself. I'm sitting in this position telling people to, have proper expectations with the roadblocks and the speed bumps that come along the way. And I didn't have anybody telling me that. I got frustrated, I get caught up in it, and you get angry and you get frustrated. So I think that would be it, of just, again, like, this stuff's going to happen and you got to deal with it with poise and urgency, and just know that that's, again, part of the game. And I definitely spent too much time on some issues that didn't need to be spent on, just because of the pure emotions were so high. So that's what I would say. If you can know that everybody who's ever done this doesn't have a blueprint, and there are going to be things that come along the way that you weren't planning on, that, that's probably the best advice I think you can give somebody who's looking to start their own thing.
Don't be so hard on yourself, and things pop up that aren't planned. I love it. That's absolutely incredible. So thank you so much. I know you're super busy. I know you got a lot of things going on with your businesses and how much you're giving. I just want to thank you again for taking the time out of your day to come on and speak with us on the Just Keep Reaching podcast. I know there's going to be so many people that get, just tremendous value. The things that you have dropped on this podcast today can change lives. And that's exactly what our intention is to help people move forward and answer some of the questions that, they may be thinking they're alone in. And you did that exactly. And so thank you so much once again for hopping on the show. I really, really do appreciate you and what you're doing.
Of course. Thanks for thinking of me, Joe.